Hi, everybody. It's Leanne, the lawyer, again, and I'm excited to be back with you. Now, we've taken you through tracing back the ownership of the property and starting that title exam, getting to know what it's like to look through that deed for clues to find the preceding deed. So, you practice, 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 and you'll get better at that, and it'll be much easier for you to spot those places in the deed that are important for you to help you trace that history. But that's not the only thing that you would be doing in a title exam. There are a lot of things that can go wrong when people are recording documents and the transfer of property. There's a lot that can happen, and that's why this is such a specialized field. So we're going to talk today about some of the things that you can be looking for. And I like to look at it as, you know what, most of what happens is problems with people. These documents aren't necessarily wrong. Somebody did something that caused this document to be wrong. Was it intentional? Was it human error? What happened? Okay, so keep that in mind when you're thinking about what types of defects should I be looking for. Think about how people's minds work. First, I'd like to talk about just basic human error. Sometimes people overlook things and they think they're doing it correctly and they really aren't. For example, an expired power of attorney or one that wasn't correctly done in the first place. Now, everybody involved in that closing may have thought that this individual had the power of attorney to sign documentation, and nobody examined the power of attorney closely enough to realize that perhaps it was expired or it didn't really apply to real estate transactions. So that's something very important to look at. So if you see anywhere in your deeds or in your title searching that somebody involved in this process was a power of attorney, you need to actually look at that power of attorney document. You need to look at the dates and make sure that when that signature was placed on that deed, whatever else that they did in conjunction with this transfer of property, that was a valid power of attorney for that time period. So hopefully you can check that off and say, nope, this was correct. Make sure that it was signed correctly, and there you go. That's one thing. That might be human error. Often that's not intentional. People just didn't realize it expired. Then sometimes there's recording mistakes. People didn't follow the proper procedures when they're recording a deed. Maybe they recorded it out of order or they did something. I don't want to get into all of the details of that right now, but that is something that is a human error. It's fairly easy to fix. Misinterpreting a will. What if somebody died and you read the will and you thought it said one thing, but in fact it said something else? Now, a lot of people aren't doing this intentionally, but sometimes wills aren't worded in such a great way and it's confusing and they think they're doing the right thing. And then it turns out later on down the road that in fact, no, this will meant something else. So keep that in mind. People might just be being human and committing human error. Now, what about actually the deed? Now, we talked about in the first week, deeds have to have certain things in order to be valid. So you want to make sure whenever you look at the deed that the person who is signing the deed, the people named in the deed are not minors. And how would you know that? You want to check the birth certificate records if you can get a hold of them. Or if there's something that alerts you and indicates to you that perhaps maybe these people aren't old enough to be signing this deed. Okay? Unsigned, unsound mind. That's going to be a very difficult one to determine, but there may be some court record somewhere that declares somebody mentally incompetent, or if you find that somebody has been given a guardian or a conservator, and at the same time they're signing deeds, that should alert you that maybe this person wasn't of sound mind when they signed the deed, which may call into question its validity. Also, if somebody is married, but on a deed it says single. Now, sometimes people will do this because that's almost an intentional thing. They're trying to keep their spouse out of the loop on this one. Okay? How can you discover that? Well, whenever you see single people listed on a deed, you might want to check out the marriage records in that county. See if you can't find anything in there that may indicate that this person was in fact married, but they went ahead and did a deed as a single person. That could cause a problem because their spouse may have a claim on the property. Now, what are some things that people might do intentionally? Okay, some people falsely impersonate the person who owns the property. A lot of times this is family members because it's really easy because they might have the same name. So let's say Joe Smith owns the property and he's 85 years old and he has a son and a grandson, both named Joe Smith. You get Joe Smith Jr. and Joe Smith III. One of those subsequent Joe Smiths might come in and say, look, my name is Joe Smith. And people may not question that, and they may assume that he has the authority to go ahead and transfer that deed. But he doesn't. He is not the elderly, the original Joe Smith. So sometimes people do that on purpose. So kind of be on the lookout, say, you know what, this man has been transferring this property for a long time. Shouldn't he be dead by now? How is he still living on for 110 years or something like that? I mean, you have to call into question some of these things. Sometimes people flat out forge deeds. They forge documents, and they commit fraud. How will you know this? Well, this is a very difficult one to catch. I mean, usually people who are forging things are trying to do a good job. But if you notice there's a big discrepancy in the way signatures are on the document, you may look into forgery. Also, people may not disclose all of their heirs. So, how would you find this? Well, if you see a will, and the will is generally going to list most of the heirs, but you see a deed somewhere along the line and the heirs don't match, or the vice versa, you see a deed and it lists maybe 8 heirs, and maybe they have, they've divided the property up a certain way, and then the subsequent deed talks about all of those heirs but one, or there's a will that does something similar. So now you have an issue where there's an heir hanging around out there and you have to figure out what happened to it. How did that person get cut out of the loop? Okay. And then I'm saving liens for last. Okay. This is where the person who owns the property finds themselves in some sort of financial problem, and a lien is placed upon the estate. This is generally because they haven't paid their mortgage, or they have unpaid estate taxes, inheritance taxes, income taxes, or gift taxes. Income taxes, you'll see a lot of those. We did that in a previous exercise where we were looking at federal tax liens and state tax liens. Those are liens against the property. And if somebody were to try to transfer that property, that debt would have to be paid off in order for this property to be clear for the next person. So you're also going to be interested in not only, taxes and, unpaid debt, but there's also other things. They might have judgments against them. So you can actually do a search for judgments. So if they were sued, maybe they owed the hospital a lot of money and they were sued, and the hospital got a judgment in the amount of $15,000 against this property owner. That judgment would attach. It could attach to that property. It could affect them. Okay, it could affect the transfer of this title. You're going to want to have all those things paid off to make sure that nobody can make a claim against this particular piece of property. So you're going to want to be checking out those judgments. Also, there could be criminal charges, criminal judgments. There could have been a divorce, and in the divorce settlement, maybe this person is no longer entitled to this piece of property. So there's a lot of things that you really need to look for to make sure that you're crossing all your T's and dotting all of your I's. Now, one of the places that you're going to go to the courthouse is you're going to check out taxes. Does this person, have they paid their real estate taxes or not? And you can kind of go back through. And the thing that, confuses a lot of people and makes it a little time consuming is that we're not just worried about the current owner of the property. We need to go back 60 years and make sure everybody checks out in that chain. So we want to know all of these things about all of those owners. Sometimes you're only dealing with 2 or 3, but sometimes this property has been transferred multiple times. Okay, well, that's all I have for today. Thank you very much, and good luck with your project.